This is a story about 20 vocabulary words. But first, it is a story about a boy who never grew up and the university his parents built in his memory. In 1884, a 15-year-old named Leland Stanford Jr. died of typhoid fever in Florence, Italy. He was the only child of one of the richest men in America. His father had helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. His mother hosted San Francisco society. They had everything except the one thing they wanted most: more time with their son. What they did with their grief would change the world. The story begins with a fortune built on steel and steam. Leland Stanford Sr. was a railroad baron, one of the Big Four, who built the Central Pacific Railroad, the western half of the transcontinental line that finally connected America coast to coast in 1869. He was also governor of California, a United States senator, and one of the wealthiest men of his era. His wealth was, in a word, ample. Ample comes from the Latin amplus, large, spacious, abundant. An ample fortune, an ample supply. The word suggests not just enough, but more than enough resources that overflow. The Stanfords had ample wealth. What they lacked was an heir to inherit it. Leland Jr., they called him simply Jr., was born in 1868. He was everything his parents hoped for: curious, kind, and earnest in his interests. A word card graphic displaying earnest edge resulting from sincere conviction. Serious and committed, showing depth of feeling or purpose in a vintage font. Earnest from Old English earnose, seriousness, vigor, a pledge of good faith. To be earnest is to mean what you say and pursue what you care about. Oscar Wilde would later title a play, "The Importance of Being Earnest," a joke. Because the character named Ernest is anything but sincere, the word carries moral weight. An earnest student is not just hardworking. They are genuinely invested. Junior collected artifacts. He loved archaeology and natural history. At 13, he had assembled a collection impressive enough that his parents built him his own small museum on their San Francisco property. He corresponded with curators. He labeled specimens. He was, by all accounts, a serious young scholar in the making. The Stanfords took their son on a grand tour of Europe, the educational journey that wealthy American families considered essential for a young person of means. They visited museums in Paris, galleries in Rome, the ancient ruins of Greece. In Florence, Junior fell ill. Typhoid fever, a bacterial infection spread through contaminated water. In 1884, there was no antibiotic treatment. The disease was often fatal, and for Leland Stanford Jr., it was. He died on March 13, 1884. He was 15 years old. The loss was devastating. What does a parent do with that kind of grief? Some collapse. Some turn bitter. The Stanfords did something that history has rarely seen before or since. According to legend, and the story may be apocryphal, Leland Stanford turned to his wife Jane and said, "The children of California shall be our children." Apocryphal, from Greek apokryphos, hidden, secret. The Apocrypha are religious texts of uncertain authorship, kept separate from the canonical scriptures. When we call a story apocryphal, we mean it has circulated widely, often for generations, but its truth cannot be confirmed. The quote about children of California appears in Stanford's founding documents and early histories. But whether those exact words were spoken in that moment, or refined later for public consumption, no one can say for certain. The story is powerful. Its literal truth is unverifiable. That is the essence of apocryphal. What we know for certain is this: within weeks of their son's death, the Stanfords began planning something unprecedented. They would not build a memorial. They would not simply endo WA scholarship or fund a wing of an existing institution. Endo from Old French endo, to give a dowry. To provide for a dowry was the property a bride brought to her marriage, a permanent gift that would sustain her new household. An endowment works the same way. A sum of money invested with only the interest spent, so the principal lasts forever. Universities live on their endowments. Professorships are endowed. Scholarships are endowed. The Stanford family would not just give money, they would endow an entire institution. They would build a university. From nothing. On their own land. In memory of their son. The site would be their Palo Alto stock farm, 8,000 acres of California countryside, where they had raised horses. The scale was unprecedented. No private citizen had ever founded a major university on this scale. Johns Hopkins, founded in 1876, came closest. But even that was built from existing institutions. The Stanfords would create everything from scratch. The buildings, the faculty, the curriculum, the charter. They would make it tuition-free. They would make it coeducational, men and women learning together, at a time when most elite institutions admitted only men, and they would call it the Leland Stanford Jr. University. Not Stanford University, not Stanford Memorial. The full legal name, to this day, is the Leland Stanford Jr. University. The boy's name embedded permanently in the institution's identity. Their grief had become a mission. The Stanfords did not simply write a check. They built a vision. They hired Frederick Law Olmsted to plan the campus grounds. They chose a Romanesque architectural style: sandstone arches, red tile roofs, long colonnades. The design was deliberately different from the Gothic towers of Harvard and Yale. This was California. This would look like California. The vision was ambitious. Ambitious comes from the Latin ambitio, a going around originally referring to Roman politicians canvassing for votes. To be ambitious is to want something significant and to pursue it actively. The Stanford's ambition was not modest. They wanted to build one of the great universities of the world, from nothing, in a place that had been a horse farm just years before. The founding grant, signed in 1885, laid out principles that were progressive for their time. Progressive from Latin, progressus, a going forward. The word always implies movement in a direction, change over time. In the 1880s, making a university coeducational open to both men and women was genuinely progressive. Stanford would also be non-sectarian, not affiliated with any religious denomination. Students of any faith, or no faith, would be welcome. The curriculum would emphasize practical knowledge alongside classical learning, engineering, agriculture, the skills that would build a state. And most remarkably, tuition would be free. The Stanfords transferred their entire Palo Alto estate to the university's board. They committed $20 million, a sum so large it is difficult to translate into modern terms. Adjusted for inflation, it would be over $500 million today. But even that comparison understates it. In 1885, $20 million was a meaningful fraction of the entire American economy. They were not merely generous, they were transformatively generous. The university opened on October 1, 1891, 559. Students enrolled, a remarkable number for a brand new institution. They came because the vision was compelling. Compelling from Latin, compeller, to drive together, to force. Something compelling does not ask for your attention, it takes it. The Stanford's vision was compelling. A world-class university, tuition-free, open to everyone. In the Golden Hills of California, but then disaster. In June 1893, less than 2 years after the university opened, Leland Stanford Sr. died of a heart attack. His death triggered a financial crisis. The federal government sued the Stanford estate, claiming Leland owed $15 million. The courts froze all Stanford assets. No money could be spent. No salaries could be paid. The university faced imminent closure. Imminent. From Latin imminere, to project over, to overhang, to threaten. Picture a boulder hanging over a cliff's edge. Jane Stanford, now a widow, now the sole trustee of her son's memorial, refused to let the university die. She sold her jewelry. She dismissed household staff. She lived on a fraction of her former income, redirecting every possible dollar. For 6 years, while the lawsuit wound through the courts, she personally funded faculty salaries. Her perseverance was extraordinary. Perseverance comes from the Latin perseverare, to persist, to continue steadfastly. To persevere is to push through the difficult and the serious. Jane Stanford did not have to fight. She was wealthy enough to walk away. But she had made a promise. In 1898, the Supreme Court ruled in her favor. The estate was released. The university would survive. Jane Stanford had saved her son's university. She had shown the world what a resolute commitment looks like. Resolute shares its root with resolution, both from Latin resolver, to loosen, to release, to settle. To be resolute is to have made that decision and to hold it firmly. Jane Stanford was resolute. the university would live. Jane Stanford lived to see her dream become real. By the time of her death in 1905, the university had graduated thousands of students. It established itself as a legitimate institution of higher learning, but she could not have imagined what would come next. The university she and her husband had created would foster an entirely new kind of economy, fostering from Old English. Fostering to supply with food, to nourish. A foster parent provides care without biological connection. To foster an idea is to nurture it toward fruition. Stanford would foster something unprecedented, a culture where academic research flowed directly into commercial innovation. In 1939, two Stanford engineering students, William Hewlett and David Packard, started a company in a Palo Alto garage. Their first product was an audio oscillator. The Walt Disney Company bought 8 of them to test theater sound systems for the movie Fantasia. That garage is now a California historical landmark. It is often called the birthplace of Silicon Valley. The relationship between Stanford and the technology industry would only augment over the decades that followed. Augment. From Latin augur, to increase. To make, grow. The same root gives us auction August. An author, Stanford augmented the region's intellectual capital. And the region's companies augmented Stanford's resources in return. A virtuous cycle. Varian Associates. Fairchild Semiconductor. Intel, Sun, Microsystems, Cisco, Yahoo, Google. Each of these companies has direct connections to Stanford, founded by alumni, spun out of research labs, or built by faculty who stayed close to campus. The university did not just produce graduates who went elsewhere. It produced an entire ecosystem. The model Stanford pioneered universities as engines of regional economic development would prove viable everywhere it was tried. Viable from Latin vita life. Something viable has life in it. It can survive. A viable business plan can succeed. A viable candidate can win. Stanford proved that a research university built in an agricultural region, far from the established power centers of the East Coast, was not only viable but potentially transformative. Route 128 in Massachusetts. Research Triangle in North Carolina. Austin, Seattle. Every technology corridor in America owes something to the model Stanford helped create. University research, industry partnership, venture capital, and talent development all concentrated in one place. The humble horse farm had become a venerable institution. Venerable. From Latin venerare, to worship, to revere. The word is usually reserved for institutions that have earned respect through time. Stanford, barely a century old, has somehow achieved what older institutions took centuries to build, a reputation that commands respect worldwide. The story of Stanford's founding illuminates something important about grief, purpose, and the choice to build rather than destroy. The Stanfords lost everything that mattered to them when their son died. They could have retreated into private mourning. Instead, they chose to transform their grief into something generative. Transform, from Latin. Trans across plus form a shape. To transform is to carry something across into a new form. A caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. A tragedy can transform into a mission. The Stanfords transformed their sorrow into stone, their loss into legacy. Their example remains exemplary. Exemplary comes from exemplar, a sample, a pattern, something to be copied. An exemplary student is one others should emulate. The Stanford story is exemplary, not because it is typical, but because it shows what is possible when grief meets purpose. When wealth meets vision, when love survives loss. Today, the Leland Stanford Jr. University enrolls over 17,000 students. Its endowment exceeds $30 billion. Its graduates have founded companies worth trillions. Its research has shaped fields from artificial intelligence to genomics to climate science. And all of it began with a father's grief, a mother's resolve, and a horse farm in California. 20 words, one university. One family's extraordinary choice. Ample, more than enough, a fortune vast and wide. Earnest, sincere, and serious, with nothing left to hide. Devastating destruction, deep, a loss beyond repair. Apocryphal, a story told, though truth is never there. ENDOW, to give a lasting gift that echoes through the years. Unprecedented, never done before, a vision without peers. Ambitious, reaching high, refusing to stay small. Progressive, moving forward, breaking down each wall. Generous, giving freely, more than what was asked. Compelling, so powerful, attention is held fast. Imminent, about to happen, looming close at hand. Perseverance, pushing through, refusing to disband. Resolute, unwavering, a will that will not break. Foster, nurturing growth for some greater sake. Augment, to increase, to add, and make it more viable, able to survive, worth fighting for. Venerable, commanding respect, through wisdom and through years. Illuminate, to shed light, making meaning clear. Transform, to change completely, a new form to create. Exemplary, the model others try to imitate. 20 words, one farm that changed the world. New episode every week? Subscribe, and we will see you next time.